Okay, so on the video about avoiding burnout, I got a comment from Zoro Weaver saying that they found the videos helpful and that on a side note, there's a specific problem they've been dealing with. I know there's no real answer to this question, but I would like to hear your thoughts. I'm a perfectionist, and because of this, I rarely finish a project. How do you decide when an artwork is complete, when all you can see is the incompleteness? How do you know when you are done and ready to publish your work? Okay, well, good question. And yes, you are correct, there's no perfect answer for it, but I can share kind of some of my thoughts and how my views on perfectionism has changed over the last few years of making YouTube content. So the general kind of quick answer I give to people that ask about perfectionism when they take a look at our work as content creators and say, hey, how do you actually manage to pump stuff out on like short deadlines like that? I've got all these ideas and I keep making them, but I can never finish any of them. It's actually quite a common question. The thing I usually say is it's a matter of perceiving what comes past the end. At least this is my case. It's going to be different for everyone. But what I mean is, when I work on only one project at a time, I usually wasn't able to finish it. I think it's different now, I think, because I've gotten into like a very strict routine of putting content out. I think I can do them one at a time now. But back in the day when I was just kind of in the learning process and didn't exactly know what I wanted to do, working on one project at a time just never really worked, or was very difficult to get through. It's because when you kind of come to like the last third of that project and it comes to trying to finalize it, you can't see what comes after the fact, and something about that uncertainty is scary. So the more comfortable alternative is to keep filling that space in with extra tasks, and it'll be like a range of excuses. So things like, oh, people won't like this project if I don't spend more time on this bit, or I haven't met my own expectations so I want to spend more time on this, and all sorts of other stuff. The uncertainty of not knowing what came after that project was the big bottleneck for me in most of the cases. So the solution to that was to have multiple projects. Each of them I was very interested in, but slightly different projects. So when you're working on one and you get bored, you want to go and work on the other one instead. The reason for that is because you can take those projects and slot them afterwards to cover up that uncertainty. So instead of looking at a project and going, I don't know what happens after I finish, you can look at it and go, oh, if I finish this, I can go and work on this more interesting thing instead. So it sort of blends the space in between and you can keep jumping between them. The thing about being excited to move on to other projects as well kind of helps you decide what's actually necessary to get a project finished. Because if you really want to move on to something else, you'll look at those tasks and go, do I really need to do that? Like, is this task important enough for me to avoid the excitement of me wanting to move on to this next project? So I found that with a lot of my projects, and this happens nowadays as well, when I'm working on something like a piece of artwork or a resource pack for someone, I'll think, well, I've got these other videos to make as well. So taking a look at my list of all the things I wanted to do for this current project, do I actually need to do all of these, or can I just do some of them, throw it out there, and then move on to the next video? Now, of course, when cutting off tasks like that, you might be reducing the quality of the work. Say, for example, if I was making like a material pack and I said to myself, I want to have like 30 different types of plastic shaders or whatever, it'd be very difficult to make 30 different plastic shaders. But just for the sake of an example, and then, I started making them, I got to about 5 or 10, and I was like, oh, well, I've fallen so far short of my expectations. My deadline's coming up for another video. I've only got 10. What am I going to do? Am I going to do the other 20? No, let's get rid of them. Because the people never knew that I wanted to make 30. 10 is better than none. So maybe I'll just clean these up, make these a bit more presentable, and just settle for that instead. So in a case like that, you've got to make a judgment and think, what do you actually have in front of you right now? Is that valuable? Can we turn that into something? Is that good enough as it is? Because as a creative personality, there's always going to be other things and other changes you want to make to a project. Without the stakes and like an obvious ending point, I think it's very difficult for someone working on their own creative project to look at it and go, yes, this is exactly how I want it. I will never ever change my mind about this at all ever. Now, that's not really realistic. It's kind of one of the reasons why I don't ever want to get like a really complex tattoo, because I think I'll probably just be bored of it like a month later. But then when talking about this, we also need to consider, what does perfectionism actually mean? Because by itself, it's a bit of a meaningless term. Like, what is perfect? Is it something measurable from your expectation or the expectation of someone else that's going to take a look at the project? Perfect is also a bit of a weird term, especially when thinking about vague and subjective things like a human being. What's a perfect human? There's no such thing as a template human being. When you fall in love with someone and you look at them and you think, hey, they're perfect, well, they're littered with imperfections. They're a completely unique set of genes, but it's perfect because we like them. So if you're measuring perfect for creative projects, like, what is that based on? And especially with creativity, when we're exploring new boundaries, perfect doesn't really make much sense, because if you're coming out of your comfort zone and exploring untrodden territory, then no one really knows what perfect is. And I think, obsessing over whether something is perfect for a certain set of audiences is restrictive for creativity in a certain way. But I think more obviously, and this is something I think most of you will agree with, when we say perfectionism, it's not just about whether it's measurably perfect in accordance with a set of rules. I think we use perfectionism as a vague term to mean several different things. One of them, which I've encountered and I know that a lot of other people do as well, is the fear of what other people will think. Now, the fear of what people will think isn't necessarily tied into like making perfect looking, perfect feeling, perfect sounding work, although that is part of it. If you think people have perfect expectations which have been grown from popular culture, for example, if you're making a music track, you know, that people have been listening to like this really professionally mastered music for years and years, are you feeling like you have to compete with that? In your mind, are you running a competition with yourself against like every professional in the world? That's something that's also quite damaging to creativity. I think there are positive and also negative consequences to always comparing yourself to professional people. The benefit of it is like, you know, for the sake of studying, you can learn a lot from professionals. The negative side of it is you're always going to have super high expectations for yourself, and you can run the risk of maximizing your frustration when you don't feel like you've achieved as much as they have. Basically, the point of this section is look inside of you when you're having trouble finishing those projects. If you think you're a perfectionist, what do you think perfectionism for you actually means? Like, what's your main worry? I know that for me, when coming out of school, when starting to work on all these creative technical projects, it was primarily what would other people think of those projects? More specifically, what would old school friends think? They would probably never see them. But, you know, in the back of my mind, in that subconscious, I had this running critical narrative of like those old friends. What would they think? Is this good enough? Will I feel embarrassed if I put this out? So this actually brings us on to something I talked about in a recent Blender Nest episode. It might not be uploaded by the time this comes out. I had trouble uploading a recent episode, like YouTube cut off part of the end. Anyway, that's irrelevant. What I'm getting onto is there's a creative trick that I have learned, which has actually been super beneficial for kind of subverting that embarrassment complex when learning creative skills. So this is an idea which I had thought about, and I think I saw Grimes kind of talking about it as well, you know, the music artist. I really like her work. And I think in one interview she was basically saying that for like some of her work she used to be a bit embarrassed about what friends or family would think. And kind of one way to subvert that is to have this kind of fictional lens that you see your work through when you're making it. So everything is done through a fiction. There's an amount of separation between you as a personal individual creative and the work that's actually being produced. So if you pretend you're someone else making the work, or you pretend it's being spoken through the story of someone else, then it adds that extra separation, therefore you don't feel as embarrassed about it. And I think that's definitely true for a lot of projects. And for me, I found that when I make a lot of my artwork, I have this kind of internal narrative going on. I have like a fictional universe in my mind, which is related to like something I'd call the Entropy Project. It was an alternate reality game I ran in 2018. It's related to some of my other work. There's a con language which is kind of hidden throughout all of my artwork as well. So there's like these ever-present fictional threads going through the work, which kind of give me this extra separation again. It's like every choice I make in those projects is not necessarily directly connected to me or my emotions, or it's me telling a story about my life. It's like there's always another layer there, and something about that, having that extra fiction kind of in between, adds a bit of confidence, because if someone comes along and they tries to break it down and critique it and go, he used this because it means this about his life, you can go, no, there's a much deeper and weirder symbolic narrative going on there. It's like a defensive mechanism which provides confidence. And there's something fun about that as well. I love kind of lacing my work in symbolism which no one will ever understand or kind of realize, and there are some really, really like obvious ones that people haven't really picked up on yet. So I guess part of what I'm saying here is that there are some little mental tricks you can do which are kind of related to the creative process, which might also be able to help with overcoming perfectionism, depending on what's causing that perfectionism in the first place. Is it a fear of what people think? Is it your compulsion to make something which is traditionally perfect in accordance to like a popular culture understanding of the artwork you're making, or the music or the video or whatever it is? Or is it something else? Are you just self-loathing with your work? Do you feel like you haven't received enough validation from people to give yourself evidence to show that this actually has value to it, this work you've produced? And if that's the case, maybe a follow-up question to that would be, do you actually need that validation to feel confident enough with finishing the project and showing it to other people? You see, when we come this far out from the term perfect, you can see how vague and kind of philosophical things get. And this is just going back to what you said exactly, that there's no perfect answer to this. It's all a continuous process of understanding your desires of what you want to make, the necessity to finish the project, external pressures which are fueling that necessity. So in my case, it would be I'm working on a weekly deadline for videos, so that's helping me to subvert perfectionism. And are there any other factors which you haven't yet identified or I haven't talked about? But on the point of validation, because again, this this is another reason I've seen why people don't commit to projects and finish them. There are a lot of people that require encouragement and validation to continue with their work, and sometimes I felt this as well when learning projects, especially when picking up new skills. I've been doing like music stuff on and off for years. I've been doing it more recently, and I have like 1 or 2 people which I show it to while I'm kind of testing the waters and building up confidence again. And I know that I need encouragement from these 2 people because I'm so lost in this creative process of all these other projects and skill sets. I don't know whether like this is actually like valuable or not. That's also why I tend to bias myself towards giving positive feedback rather than negative feedback in critique. That's a whole other conversation. But do you actually need the validation and encouragement when learning skills to feel confident enough to share your work and put it out there? I feel like it's very important, like if you have ambition for like a final direction you want to head in. I want to be a game developer, I want to be a YouTuber, I want to be a famous musician or whatever. I feel like the ambition alone should be enough to keep you on that journey and keep you moving. But sometimes it's very, very difficult for people to find that self-inspiration and that ambitious drive. For those that do have it, it usually comes from deeply emotional and deeply personal places. A lot of it is usually tied into, this might sound weird, sexuality, friendship, desire for admiration, and stuff like that. A lot of it can be like really grounded down into very fundamental parts of human nature if you want it to be. And there's nothing inherently shameful about that. I mean, the same is true for a lot of my work. But if one of the reasons why you're unable to finish a project is because you're sitting there not necessarily feeling the confidence or the drive to carry on with it because you haven't received any evidence from anyone else that it's actually got value to it, like you don't think anyone else likes it, so you're sat there going, oh, what's the point in doing this? What's the point in even trying to finish it? You know, because it's just valueless. First of all, shut up. No matter what you make, someone is going to like it, okay? There are too many people in the world for that not to be true. The first problem for that is just finding the right people. But secondly, maybe again, a solution to that is trying to find that personal drive where you are your own encouragement and no one can put that flame out. But again, you know, looking back, most perfectionism does come down to much more simple problems. Here's me comparing myself to what other people have made. Here's me not having the necessary skills or knowledge to actually create what I wanted to achieve in the first place, and stuff like that. Very obvious things. For that last one as well, me not having the necessary skills to complete what I wanted to make in the first place. Come on, you know what the solution is. Just learn more, spend more time developing your skills. Something like that has a much more obvious solution, but everything else is very difficult. I used to struggle with it a lot, you know, back after I left school and coming up to, again, 2018 when I kind of started YouTube. So I left school 2014, so 14 to 18, that 4-year period was very difficult. I think 99% of my projects that I started, they were mostly game development projects, never got finished. Never at all. Everything got thrown away or got lost on dead hard drives. There are so many really, really cool experiments that never saw the light of day, and that's just the way it goes. That's part of the creative process. There is some benefit in starting many, many projects as fast as you can and never finishing them. Of course, finishing projects is also a very necessary skill because learning how to prioritize tasks, wrap things up, and clean things up as well, and then produce them, publish them in front of people, that's also very important if you want to be any kind of like content output or outputter or publisher. But I always said to people, when you start learning new skills, starting as many projects as you can as fast as you can is usually the fastest way to start your learning, because you'll encounter new techniques and new tools at a much faster pace, faster than someone that just sat down with one project and only worked on that very singular project for their entire learning process. So I don't think people should feel too ashamed for never finishing their projects, especially if they're new learners right at the beginning of their learning journey. I most certainly couldn't finish anything to save my life back then, and I remember it did stress me out. But looking back on it now, I'm like, okay, that was actually probably really, really good for my learning process. Having bumped into such a wide variety of projects and skill sets means I'm very adaptable to different tasks and can blend creative and technical things very well, which is why I do both sides. It also lends you a skill which I think a lot of companies are looking for, which is rapid prototyping. And in this day and age, if you're being like an independent creator, a lot of people don't necessarily need or desire finished projects. I mean, more in like the kind of resource and creative space. There are a lot of people that just make a living off of just putting experiments on Patreon and Gumroad and stuff like that. And like a lot of people in our community, me included, I guess, like, are any of my tools ever completely finished? No, I don't think so. Like, there's always room for more to happen. They're all experiments and works in progress. So yeah, I mean, I know this has been a much more rambling like video, but again, it is a very kind of vague thing to answer. But I don't know, maybe some of these ramblings help people kind of untangle some of those thoughts and help them feel a bit more confident about, their project management. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now. So feel free to comment, share your experience. Again, everything I've said is just, my personal take on it. And like with all these discussion videos, there are a million different angles which, I can't think of immediately or fit into a video. That's actually one of my pet peeves about discussion videos, right? And this is again, another reason why I don't do them on the main channel anymore. Like if I used to speak about something kind of vague, I can only think about so many angles at a time, like within this 1 hour period when I record something. And just because I haven't mentioned a different angle, it doesn't mean I disagree with that angle. I used to get so many comments of people going, I disagree with Curtis. I think it's because of this. And I'm like, we don't disagree. I agree with that. I just didn't think about it. I just didn't speak about it. Just because it's not mentioned in the video, it doesn't mean I disagree with it. Anyway, rambling. So thanks for listening, everyone. Stay safe, and I will see you next time.